All right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope that everybody can hear me. If somebody wants to just give me a shout out in the chat box, let me know you can hear me, that would be great. I'm just going to carry on. This is Julie Colgan. I'm with DTI. I'm so pleased to be here with you guys today, and sharing my time with me is Sandra Serkes, the CEO and President of Valora Technologies. Before we get started into the content, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I want to remind everybody, even though the lady just told us that everybody's on mute, and will remain that way through the entire session, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the questions box on the controls for the webinar. And please type those in as your questions arise, so we can get to them at the end, as many as possible. Also, just to let you know, we are going to be recording this session. After the session is over, we'll be sending out an email to all of the registrants with a link to that recording, as well as a copy of the slide deck, and also a link to a feedback survey. So any of you who have attended today and have some feedback on the content or the speakers or ideas for future webinars, please share those with us so we can bring you more good content. So without further ado, Sandy, if you want to go to the next slide, we can talk about ourselves for a second. While I've got the floor, I'll just talk about myself. So again, this is Julie Colgan. I have been with DTI for about a year and a half or so. Some of my job is focused on RIM and IG, but I'm also focused on helping our management solutions line of business stay relevant in the marketplace as technology brings more and more interesting opportunities to bear. My background, though, is about 20 years or so in information management, from the government side to the corporate side, to about 8 years inside law firms. Been a consultant several times, and on the software side, a certified records manager, certified information governance professional, and past president of ARMA. For me, though, in context of this topic today, my passion throughout my career has really been finding a way to get records management off the front lines, because our frontline employees they're not great at it. They don't want to do it, and we don't want them spending their time to do it. So how can we, as professionals, figure out how to get this done in a way that doesn't disrupt the business? And so it's been an interesting ride the last 20 years, and I think the last 5 have been particularly interesting. And I think we're getting closer, and this topic today is one of the things that I hope will help us get there. So with that, Sandy, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. This is Sandra Serkes. I'm the president and CEO and one of the original co-founders of Valora. And this month, November, we're very happy to be celebrating Valora's 17th birthday. So I, too, have been in this business for some time, coming a little bit more originally from the e-discovery angle, but moving very much into information governance and really content analysis over the last 5 or so years. So I don't have all kinds of fancy letters after my title, but I do think I know what I'm talking about. So hopefully we will have a very lively discussion today between Julie and me.
Great. Thanks, Sandy. So let's go ahead and jump into this. This will be kind of like a panel of one. I'm going to be the moderator and talk us through some of this. So I'm going to get us started and talk about how did we get here. So the technology revolution that we've all experienced over the last 20 years or so, particularly the last 7 or so years, has firmly established what I call an information economy. We're now encouraged to create content like nobody's business. I know myself, I've got a phone, a tablet, and a laptop, and creating content all day, every day, whether it's in the course of business and dealing with my clients, or participating in social media. Content is now everywhere, and it's easier to create. Technology also allows us wide distribution of that content. So while in the past I may have sent a letter to Sandy, and Sandy was the recipient, now I could send that letter to Sandy in an email and copy 50 other people and maybe post a copy on Facebook. And it's piling up all around us. It's no different in corporate America. So the typical large corporation's got email servers, file shares, archive servers, stuff on your desktop, stuff on your mobile devices, out there in the ether and social media and whatnot. And so, frankly, we're just buried under all of this information, and trying to figure out how it is that we are going to deal with it. Again, going back to, if we're going to rely on people on the front lines, they're going to spend the majority of their day classifying information, which is really counterproductive to what our organizations are trying to do. We've got to figure out how to leverage technology to solve the problems technology is creating. So moving to the next slide, Sandy, some of the bad things that can happen if we don't try and fix these issues. Obviously, there's an obvious high cost of not finding information. There have been lots of studies over the years talking about how much time knowledge workers spend trying to find information, and then how much time they then spend recreating information that does exist but they couldn't find anywhere. So these numbers are significant, 15 to 35% of time spent searching for information. Some studies indicate 90% of time knowledge workers are recreating information that already exists somewhere else. Another study by IDC was only 21 respondents to their survey said they could find the information they needed 85 to 100% of the time. If you start to put real numbers to that, if you figure 52 cents per minute times 25% of your day, that's $62 or so every single day that's being wasted on looking for and or recreating information. But in addition to that, we also have just pure inefficiencies. It's not just inefficiency around trying to find information, but then we become inefficient collaborators with our peers and our colleagues and our clients. We also risk being non-compliant with laws, regulations, ethical obligations, and client requirements that are upon us, which then potentially exposes us to litigation. It also, and this is becoming more and more prevalent in today's world, it exacerbates our ability to respond to breaches. Breaches are a fact of life. For organizations who claim to not have been breached, I would probably expect that it's just because you haven't noticed yet. And if you really haven't, it really is just a matter of time. And so all of this clutter in our organizations is just exacerbating our ability to first identify that we've been breached and then respond to it. All right, going on to the next slide, Ms. Sandy.
Julie, before we jump in, this might be
sure.
a good time to, since I didn't quite do it at the beginning, I was so eager to get going, to maybe poll our audience a bit about their information issues.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so hello world. We have a couple of quick polls for you to keep you on your toes during the course of this. So I'm going to post these up now. They should just take a second to one, kind of let us know who you all are. We have, in case people don't know, we have a huge audience today. We're expecting upwards of 100 people. So it'd be very interesting for all of us to know kind of collectively in the aggregate, who are we and what are the information needs that people are seeing across their organizations. So I'm going to put this up and ask you guys to just click, your identity a little bit, and then we'll run a couple others kind of on the side. So we're going to essentially ask you a little bit kind of where do you come from, and a little bit what's your role, and then specifically kind of what your data management or records management, information management issues are. And I'm going to see if we can run more than one poll at a time. How do you like that? Let's see. Oh, no, I can't. All right, so why don't we go on? I'll leave this one open for a minute, Julie, and then we'll, kind of strategically jump into the other ones as we go.
Yep, I'm going to leave you to it, the poll master.
Okay, so shall we, you can kind of see it's still collecting responses. About 71% of you have put your responses in, so come on, the rest of you, 30%, let's go. There we go. Now they're coming in. Thank you. We've got a nice mix, by the way, of across the board between corporate, law firm, consultancies, and a couple of others as well. All right. If you want to see who we are, I'll show you. Here's who we are. That's kind of who's on board, and we'll also have a little bit of a look. Let's do a second one. maybe. Which is your role. Ready, guys? Go. By the way, we have 4 webinars in this series. I promise on the next one we'll do this up front.
Yeah, sorry, we were all so excited to jump in
And we
and
were
talk
like,
about
jump in.
piles of information everywhere.
All right, so people are much quicker on this one. Thank you, everyone. And then we have one more, which is really what made me think of it, because we want, I'll post this one as well. Really the last question before we really dive in is to kind of understand what the most pressing issues are for all of you. So make sure that we hit those in this conversation. So, so here we go. Last one, I promise. All right, ready? Go. Okay, here they go. All right, so maybe while that one's kicking along, Julie, we can proceed ahead, and I'll post these as they kind of come online, because this is the last poll for now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just kind of fielding some text actually, because we have some folks who are saying, "Hey, I'm trying to get in, I'm stuck." So hopefully they're able to get in. So I think you have to leave this up though. We can't move on with the slides. Is that right?
No, I think we can. So here we go. Are you seeing the slide?
No,
you're right. Sorry. Okay, I have to close that. I'll share that just so everybody can see what the interest is, and then I can go on with the slide. Didn't realize we couldn't double team here. Here we go. Okay.
All right. Great. So the next question is, what is auto-classification, and how does it potentially help us with what we're trying to accomplish here? So at the highest level, and maybe the simplest level, Sandy and I agree that auto-classification is possible through a combination of rich metadata and rules. Click again there for me, Sandy. So obviously we're talking about software here, and that it performs some sort of automated analysis and then disposition of files, documents, and content, and that software is able to do that through something called recognition algorithms or entity extraction, which can include document typing, content analytics, indexing and tagging, and then making some recommended locations and naming based on the things that it learns. So effectively, it's a middleware type of software that sits between where the files sit within the organization and then the actual applications or the file uses. It's effectively an intelligent filter. And if you'll quickly flip to the next slide, I think this shows this in a more graphical way, where we have our data silos. So we can all recognize that there's content sitting in different places across the organization, but the people within the organization actually have different needs to access and then use and aggregate and mash up that content. So click one more time for me, Sandy. So these are some of those data needs, right? So someone maybe just needs to search and retrieve something that they don't know if it's on the file share or if it's out in a cloud app, or exactly what it might be called. Maybe we need to apply retention or a legal hold. Maybe there's private information that needs to be secured, or we need to move something to a new location or a new application. And of course, data lifecycle planning and management needs to happen. But the challenge is trying to do that without some sort of intelligent filter between the two that can translate the data needs out to where the data silos are. And that's really where auto-classification comes in particular, Valora's Powerhouse product and Blackhat product serve those purposes. So they actually create intelligence about the content in those data silos that then allow individuals to make sense of it and execute against their data needs. So Sandy, you kind of talked about starting on the e-discovery side, and I've been in this business for a long time, and there are a lot of technologies out there that can do file analysis and have been around for many years. Many of them came out of the onset of e-discovery as an industry in the early or mid-2000s. Tell me more about where you guys got your start and how you got to where you are.
Sure. So we actually kind of predated that a little bit. Valora got started in 2000. And at that time, it was largely a paper world. And so the original technology was essentially parsing or understanding OCR text. So if you have paper files, typically they get scanned or imaged, and then that's a digital picture of your file, and so then OCR provides a text rendition. And most people were doing OCR so that they would have the ability to search. We were taking that a step further and saying, well, if you have an OCR baseline to work from, you can now do content analytics. And so that was one of the first things that we really brought to the table, almost in advance of the notion of e-discovery and ideas of bringing metadata. In those days, we might have called it document coding. But basically, one way or another, the technology or the concept is the same, which is to add information and smarts around content when there weren't any before. And so that applies to, sure, certainly scanned paper, but in many ways, digital files today suffer from the same problem. Yes, we have some metadata. In email, we have a little more, but basically every other file is kind of at the mercy of essentially simple file metadata, which does not really provide a lot of information. So the same tools that we were using once upon a time in a paper world have great applicability today in an ESI world that's much larger than e-discovery. It's more at like an enterprise level of what is all this stuff? We need to manage it now. That's what information governance says. And so we need methods and tools and technologies to actually do that. So that's how we kind of migrated to here.
Gotcha. Hey, I think you missed moving a slide forward. So if you want to,
sorry,
2 slides ahead. Yeah. Go one more slide forward. So let's dig in more about metadata and the role of metadata and our ability to make smart decisions about content. So you talked about properties and how system-generated properties are useful, but they're limited. So what is it about metadata, and in particularly rich metadata, that brings us forward in this conversation?
Sure. So this is my little balloons diagram. Why balloons? Because I like them. But most people that are kind of come from an e-discovery viewpoint will recognize the kind of the data attributes or the metadata in the red balloon. This is typical file metadata. It's the kind of thing you're going to see in e-discovery. It's the kind of thing that basically every file, every electronic file has, but it's not very helpful. It's sort of helpful, but it doesn't really tell you any detail about what the file is or whether it's important or germane to a certain purpose. It certainly doesn't address typical information governance things like how long does this need to be retained, or should this be under legal hold, or does this need to be locked down for security purposes? That's very hard to determine from this kind of metadata, which I would call sort of simple or file level metadata. The other balloons represent a much deeper, richer type of metadata. And we sometimes use these terms interchangeably: metadata, tagging, attributes. Those are all essentially elements or meta-knowledge about a file's contents that can be very, very useful just on their own, or extra useful if you're going to kind of feed them into some decisioning structure like a rules engine so that you can take actions on content. And I know we're going to get to that, so I'll leave it high level here. But basically, once you go into the content and actually start analyzing what's there, you have almost unlimited options for metadata. For example, Powerhouse supports about 600 different types of fields. These are just some examples that you see here. The yellow balloon, for example, is literally just talking about concepts of date that might be present in content, but there are many, many more than just what you see here. Just simple things like zip code or chemical name or latitude, longitude, or street address or blood type. Anything that is a sort of data element like that is capturable with auto-classification.
Sorry, I put myself on mute so I wouldn't, you wouldn't hear me drinking my Diet Coke. Yeah, that's exactly, Sandy. So, I mean, I found this to be the case in my years as well. Using tools like Valora's Powerhouse are really powerful. You know, I've sat in front of clients who have used technology like this and seen their content through effectively new eyes. It really brings a whole nother level of understanding to which folks can make smart business decisions, whether it's a records manager trying to figure out, you know, does this thing need to be on legal hold or can I dispose of this record, to a business user saying, you know, is this the latest version of the contract that I need to then get out to the client? This actually allows you to do that with a whole lot more confidence. So you'd mentioned kind of rules, and I know we want to keep it high level because we've got 3 other sessions we want to do, and we'll dig deeper in the next one into kind of the details around how we create structure from unstructured data. But just for a second, on the next slide, we've got kind of a high-level overview of how auto-classification works on the whole. Do you want to walk us through that?
Certainly. So typically, a system like Powerhouse will either be installed on-prem with a client, so behind the client's firewall, directly touching, you know, corporate data and staying within the confines of that environment. Or it can be kind of deployed as a cloud SaaS type solution. So it kind of supports either model, but either way, Powerhouse is essentially made aware of the data wherever it might live. So it might be in a file share, might be an email server, might be on random desktops, or in some sort of repository, or any combination of the above. But basically, once things sort of turn on, and Powerhouse is a little bit sort of on the hunt for files, the first step is actually very similar to e-discovery for those that are familiar with that type of workflow. It's a processing step. We call it intake, but it's basically processing. And Powerhouse, one way or another, is going to get to text. So if it's a native file, it's going to do text extraction very similar to e-discovery. If it's not a native file, it's a scanned image or something like that, it'll run OCR, again, trying to get to text. And then there's a little bit more fanciness that happens. So for example, if that file is an audio file, like a recording of a phone call or a voicemail, or if it's video content, like a news broadcast or like this webinar, then we run a speech-to-text translation. So again, getting to text. Same idea for things that might not be in English. We have an auto-translation engine that will convert the original file, actually supplement the original file with an English rendition. So all of that is really kind of setup or intake to say, let's get to text so that we can really start to have some fun. So once the text is available, then we kind of kick off those 2 pieces of auto-classification, tagging and rules. So tagging is that metadata capture, the balloons that we were just looking at, where essentially what happens is that we're making a metadata record that is aware of each file, each piece of content, and is kind of storing attributes. It's almost like a blood workup or a gene sequencing, where every little bit of information that can be captured is captured and stored in a database record. And that's pretty useful on its own, and there's a certain amount of display and information that can come just from knowing what do I have. And based on the poll, a lot of you are very interested in that. Close to 40% of the people wanted to know, what do I have? This is that step. Okay, but once you know what you have, now you have a really powerful kind of baseline to then take actions. And that's the last step, this kind of disposition, the rules. And as Julie said, we're going to kind of get into this in way more detail on a subsequent webinar. But for now, basically what rules do, well, what tagging does is tell you, what is this? What do I have? And what rules tell you is, what should I do about it? Now that I know what I have, I can kind of search text or utilize it, but I have all this really delicious metadata that I can use to construct a sequence of rules and tasks. And so I might do things like move data to its proper location. I might lock down data because it contains sensitive content like PII. That's personally identifiable information. I might simply decide, you know, this is junk and this should be defensively deleted. Lots of different options can happen at the rules stage, including just a simple tagging of everything but no actual actions. We'll talk about that more in a bit.
Yeah, can I jump in real quick? So one of the things I'll mention, and I know we have a slide later, but the tagging process to me, and as a records manager and for any other records managers on the phone, that's the context stage. That's where we decide that what it is and that it has some value to the organization or has none. But you can make an affirmative decision about it because you've gathered enough context around the content of this thing. And so, you know, again, we'll have a fun slide later about context, but just wanted to bring that out here. One other thing on this step, don't underestimate the processing step in AutoClassification because it's garbage in, garbage out, just like any other computer or automated task. If you guys are evaluating technology that does this kind of work, make sure you spend a good amount of time on due diligence around the processing step because you want to make sure that they're actually going to be able to open up and deal with the kinds of files that you typically will have, that it has a level of consistency and reliability around the data that it extracts, and you understand all of that. So, all right, Sandy, I'm going to ask you to go through your few examples that you have here.
Sure.
They're super fun, but I'm going to ask you to keep it as tight as you can on time so we make sure we have time for some questions at the end.
Will do. So we pulled together just a few simple examples of what auto-classification looks like. And this one is for the folks who are here today from the law firms. This is a very common law firm example, which is to classify by matter number. In other words, take some content, in this case an email and an attachment, and tell us where it needs to go. Maybe migrate it right on into the DMS if you're using one of those. If not, just tell me who does this content belong to in terms of classification. So you can of course see it right in front of your eyes, but so does the software. So when you see orange in these examples, that's the tagging step. So it's tagging, it's figuring out kind of important players, important words, keywords, and of course it's going to find the ringer content. In this case, validating itself with both the word and the number and saying, you know, it's going to go through this, hold on to that attachment, don't want to lose that, and then go through all the tagging steps, then go to the rules engine, and the rules are going to say, okay, we got it. It belongs in the Pissarro matter, classify it that way, and potentially migrate it into that folder. So that's all being done automatically. Nobody has to sit there slogging through their email, dragging stuff into folders, or coming up with keywords or anything like that. Software's going to do all the work. So that's a kind of law firm, or really any professional services or matter tracking environment is going to have the same type of issue. This one is pretty much universal. Folks who come from e-discovery tend to call this defensible deletion, and folks with more of a records or infogov background tend to call it rot removal. If anyone doesn't know, that's redundant, obsolete, or trivial, also known as junk. There is rampant junk everywhere, and so auto-classification is an excellent way to find it and what we might call remediate it or get rid of it. So how does that happen? So here's a perfect example of junk. It's a 3-year-old Christmas card, digital. And so the first thing that it does is it finds kind of words that typically don't have a whole lot of business, regulatory, or legal value. It's looking overall at dates. What other content is there? None. So the bulk of this content is on the watch list. Heavy kind of graphics to content ratio is often an indicator. Lots of copies. Again, going to kind of come up as junk with a very high confidence. We didn't mention this earlier, but most of this decisioning and most of this kind of labeling or tagging is done with different levels of statistical confidence. So it's not just like, hey, you mentioned the word Christmas, you must be junk. There's all kinds of weightings underneath here and all kinds of levers. We'll get into all of that in a later webinar, but just in case people were wondering, thought I'd toss that out. So this is just a classic example of rot detection and then potentially rot removal or defensible deletion, if you like that term. Here's,
I actually don't like it, but thanks for asking.
Sure. That's like a religious war. I'm not getting into it.
Fair enough.
So here's another one. This is becoming increasingly common because every organization has lots of contracts, and in particular when organizations are coming together like an M&A or splitting apart like a divestiture, analysis of contracts becomes a huge issue. And there's usually a very tight turn time around situations like that. That's almost the hallmark for calling for AutoClassification. Because the last thing you want to do is throw 50 people in a room for 6 months to kind of do this work when it can be easily done with software, quite frankly, in probably a week. So here's what this looks like. Again, identifying document type. A contract, maybe what type of contract. Important clauses and terms like the effective date, parties. Pretty much any of this type of content is gettable as long as the text quality is clean and what is being sought is relatively straightforward. As long as you have that as your setup, you're a very good candidate for AutoClassification.
Yeah, and this one in particular, there's so many value propositions around contracts. I mean, pulling out standard clauses, populating a contract management system. There's this one in particular I think is really useful. So the next slide, if we're ready to go there, it's my favorite slide in the whole deck. So talk us through this context, and then we're going to jump into some more use cases.
Okay, sure. So Julie mentioned earlier that context plays a big role, and that's right. We talked about, kind of search or early level kind of content analysis has been around for a long time. But as anyone who's tried to navigate a large population of data knows that just search alone is very, very limited. Sometimes you don't know what to search for. Sometimes you get back way too many, kind of hits. And so the notion of context adds some color to that. So context really is saying, what are the circumstances around this content? So for example, if you let's say you were going to search for a name inside content. It's okay, the name shows up, that's helpful, but it makes a big, big difference if you know that that name showed up and that that person was the author. Okay, that's context. It's adding that color, that other piece of information that says, oh, wait a minute, that puts a whole new spin on this. If Sandy authored that content, then she is kind of a custodian of it. It could prove knowledge. Same thing with recipients sometimes as an indication of essentially a consummation of a conversation. And so context has a really big role to play in the analysis of file contents. And so we have up here a kind of simple example for you to really demonstrate why context matters. We're going to use the same phrase over and over that starts with, wonder if anyone would mind. So here's the first one. It's a cute little doggy. I wonder if anyone would mind if I curled up under this desk and took a nap. Aw, that's so cute. That's so sweet. Okay, what if it's not the dog saying that? Well, it'd be interesting if a dog did say that, wouldn't it? Okay, what if it's your worker? Okay, Wonder if anyone would mind if I curled up under this desk and took a nap. Well, yeah, I'm paying your salary. I would surely mind. Very different reaction. It gets worse. Well, what if the pilot decided to curl up and take a nap while you're in mid-flight? Not so good. Not good at all. And then the kind of sad case, what if somebody, strolling into the front lobby of your building? Probably not okay. All right? These are all the identical phrase. And this is trying to show you guys that context matters. Who said it? Why or wrote it? Why did they say it? To whom were they speaking? What was their intent? If you really want to get fancy, what was their sentiment or their tone? We can do another whole webinar on tone analysis if you like. But it really matters, all those other things way beyond just the literal text. That's context. And good auto classification will acknowledge and take advantage of context.
Exactly. I love this. I love this slide. Thank you for that. So moving to the next slide is really 10 very popular use cases for auto classification. If you imagine to yourselves as you're breezing over this list, thinking about, again, the importance of that context. And we can't get to good context without good processing and good tagging. So Sandy, I just wanted to talk over, a little bit of this slide. As I said at the beginning, in case people joined us late, we're going to be providing the slide deck as well as a recording for this webinar to all registrants. So if you've missed anything or you want to read this later, you'll have the ability to do that. So, on here, which one's your favorite one, Sandy? And I'll show you which one's mine.
Wow, I've never been asked that. Boy, I don't know if I have a favorite, Julie. You go ahead.
All right, I'll tell you, and this is just from my days on the practitioner side. Orphaned data is my favorite. It drives me crazy. It's a relic of moving at business speed. People are just too busy to deal with the stuff that Sally left when she left, or stuff that just got siloed because of a upgrade or a migration, and nobody knew what to do with it in the IT department, so they just kind of put it in the corner. That stuff is everywhere, and from a risk to the business perspective, it's so significant. It's kind of that dark data conversation we were having a number of years ago. So for me, it's the most satisfying to help organizations come up with a way, not just from a backwards-looking project perspective, but then from a process going forward perspective. How do we stop creating that problem? Solving that for clients is really satisfying for me. So any thoughts now?
Yeah, actually, I think my favorite might be in the category of either remediation or one that we don't quite have spelled out, which is just basically straight on identification of content. Because the relief that I see on clients' faces going from the vast unknown, the void of content, to having command and control of that content, it's incredible. I feel like I've just performed surgery and saved their lives. So that's the one that I will pick.
Excellent. I'll just make a special note here of the one on the left on the bottom in the blue box. For anyone who's on this webinar who either works for directly or through a services organization for international clients who are going to be facing compliance with the GDPR, or anybody who just does business with them that will have to comply as well. It's one more reason to consider getting your arms around your content with technology. Technology is really the only thing that's going to give you the scale you need to do it well. So I think, Sandy, we wanted to do a repeat poll here on what matters to people now that we've kind of gone through some of this content. You want to throw that one up on the screen?
Yes, we'll do. So everybody take a good look at this. Now that we've hopefully educated you a bit on auto classification, we're going to ask you the poll again and see if anybody's answers have changed. And one thing I'd like to point out is that a strong auto classification engine can and should handle most, if not all of these use cases. There's really not a need to buy, 16 different systems or technologies. At the heart, it's all the same task, which is what is this stuff and what should we do about it? So again, a strong engine should be able to handle most, if not all, of these use cases. All right, we have those responses coming in now. About half of you have voted. Oh, here they come. It's interesting to see how it's changed a little bit. Definitely. I will share the responses with you at the end, but things have polarized a bit more. Very interesting.
Interesting. I love that.
Yeah. It's too bad I can't share it with you while it's going. It's kind of fun to watch, but there it is. So we're almost at 75% having voted.
All right, those of you who haven't voted yet, hurry up. You get 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, close it down, Sandy.
All right, we're closed. And here are the results. So a bit more polarized. A lot more people very interested in understanding what they have, and a bit stronger on the migration as well. And I'll take that to mean hopefully that the education is making a difference, hopefully sharing with people what's possible. That's sort of what jumps out at me. What about you, Julie?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, the identifying and understanding data is the precursor to all of these other things. So, like you, I mean, I've sat in front of folks and who've never really been able to see the true contours of their data, that all of a sudden can see it, and it's euphoric. So it's interesting. I think this is good. It's a good result.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right, so flip back to the slides, because one thing that is really important to me, and I've mentioned it before, is, it's one thing to use technology to look backwards and clean up a pile of junk, but how do you use technology like this in an evergreen fashion? Because frankly, no records manager wants to live in a Groundhog's Day world where 6 months later they have to go and do the same project again because they didn't figure out operationally how to solve the problem of creating the map. So can you flip one slide forward, Sandy, and then talk to me a little bit about, how you're seeing your clients deal with this challenge of operationalizing auto-classification?
Sure thing. And one of the things that sort of a quip that I have come up with for folks, particularly because usually it is the back file that gets everybody's attention because it's massive. We have 45 terabytes of 10 years of email. The back file is what kind of is the showstopper or the call to action for people, but it can't stop with the back file. Every day that goes by, more stuff is accumulating. And so my little quip, and feel free everyone to share it, is that today's day forward is tomorrow's back file. Okay? So think about that one. Take that home, try it out on your kids. But that's exactly what happens. And so it's almost like you're either chasing your tail if you're trying to batch things up and do it back file and then wait a month and then back file. And in fact, this is what a lot of systems that are in play now, particularly around email, they are essentially allowing email to accumulate for 90 days and then flushing it out. That is sort of a purely time-based system, probably not the best approach for deciding what should be kept and what should be flushed out. Really, that should be based on content, and not just because 90 days, on the 89th day it mattered and on the 90th day it didn't. And I think those tools are in play because that's sort of all we had before we really got into auto-classification. Today, you can make much more strategic slicing and dicing of content and keep that which is relevant and flush that which is not just for the back file, but ongoing. Some people say ongoing, some people say day forward, some people say evergreen. They're all the same concept, which is once you have kind of proper data hygiene and a tool to ensure that, then you can have that going forward forever. So this is what that looks like. So Powerhouse essentially is aware of content where it lives. Now, if it's a back file, it's already there. But if it's a day forward or a go forward, it's content as it is born. So the next email to be received by the organization, the next Word file to be saved by somebody, the next image that gets scanned in. All of those become essentially live fodder for an auto-classification system. And the way that that works, obviously the back file, point to the back file and let her rip. But the day forward is essentially a polling mechanism. So the system is polling these various servers and repositories and looking for what are called a delta doc, or in other words, anything that has changed. So a file that has been opened and changed, a new file, an edit, all of those constitute a delta. And so the system that's polling, usually every 5 seconds, in case you're wondering, is aware that there's been a change, goes in and kind of background classifies on the fly. It's almost real time. It's kind of near real time. Everybody always asks this, about a 2.5 second latency. So you save a file, it goes onto your server, 2.5 seconds later it's got its full metadata tagging, and any rules, actions that are going to be taken will be taken. So that is not exactly real time, but awfully close. And that's what we mean by day forward, so that we don't wind up 20 years hence having, another, huge stockpile. Once you kind of clear out the existing stockpile, you can be evergreen and never really have a stockpile again. Just to finish.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, great, yeah. So just to finish off this slide, this is sort of kind of showing what Powerhouse looks like in the data flow, in the mix of things. So it's analyzing all this content, both back file and day forward, as well as kind of, let me go in the other order. Kind of placing its findings into a metadata repository. We briefly mentioned Blackhat at the outset. That's a second product that sort of sits on top of Powerhouse and provides data visualization or data dashboard analytical view of what's happening in here. So this is a great way to essentially manipulate content in any kind of faceted or attribute-based way that you want to. So if you want to take things that are ready to expire, contracts from 2002 that are ready to expire, you sort of click on that. That's the kind of fun that you can have once you've figured out what everything is. One of the nice kind of what do I do about it steps would be presentation layer. So that's what this is. Show me what I have in a nice graphical way, so I don't have to be, a crazy Boolean search goddess to figure it out. I can just click and click, and I know what I have. So that's kind of what happens here. And the other big thing that happens, and Julie, I think we were going to touch on this lightly, was migration. And so one of the things that can happen either as a back file or literally on the fly is as soon as content is analyzed, it can then be migrated to the right location in a repository, in a cloud-based environment, into a DMS, wherever it is that information might need to live, like as a system of record, again, can all be handled by software. You don't have to rely on the people to do it.
Excellent. Good stuff. So it gives me hope that my unicorn of getting RM off the front lines is perhaps on my doorstep. That's good. All right, so we've got about 9 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide, and I'm going to go over this pretty quickly just on my own, and then we'll get to some closing comments and question and answers. So you'd be remiss in a 101 session without talking about stakeholders involved in auto-classification initiatives, whether that be kind of backfile, cleanup stuff, or day forward. So I'll just kind of run around the circle here. I hope most people, if not everybody on this webinar, has seen this model before. If not, it is the EDRM's Information Governance Reference Model. I find it extremely useful when talking about stakeholders in the concept of information governance. So let's think through it real quick. I mean, we've got the business folks who, what do? They're the ones who actually create value for the organization. They're the ones curing cancer or selling cars or whatever they do. And we need to maximize their ability to do that. So Obviously, auto-classification helps them get access to the right information at the right time, to make sure it's the right version, to not trip over a bunch of junk and be inefficient like we saw earlier in this webinar where knowledge workers are wasting a bunch of time searching and then wasting even more time recreating stuff that already exists. Then, of course, we have privacy and security, which I think, you know, I'd be interested to see if the EDRM folks actually break out that slice even more. Because originally it wasn't even there; it's just part of IT. But really, these folks, you know, are really interested in making sure that they're actively protecting private information and that they have security controls available to keep people out of stealing the good stuff. And so how do you do that if you don't, in fact, know what information you have and where it is? It's hard to have a proactive security posture. You know, it's anything other than just building a big moat and a tall wall if you're not content aware. IT efficiency is kind of IT ops. So those are the ones who manage all of the storage and the applications through which people access content. Obviously, they have a big stake in the complexity of data storage as your data collection grows. So they have a stake in making sure that that the content is optimized and aligned with their stakeholders, the other stakeholders' needs. Records and information management, obviously, they're the keepers of the application of retention policies that help make sure that the organization is compliant, and then, of course, legal, making sure that the organization has the ability to defend its interests through the use and leverage of information within the organization. So, you know, it's clear to go around the stakeholder matrix and say all of these have a really compelling argument and stake in how information is governed within an organization, and you can clearly articulate the value proposition of an auto-classification investment on the ability to meet those objectives under the banner of IG. So go ahead and flip to the next slide, Sandy. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes left, so kind of closing comments from your perspective.
I guess the closing comments are, first of all, to thank everyone for coming on and sharing a little bit about who you are and what your issues are. It really hammers home for me just how sorely auto-classification is needed out there. And I think a lot of people were just sort of waiting for this technology to come along. And sometimes they almost can't even believe that it works. So one of the things I guess I would suggest to people as kind of a takeaway is feel free to experiment with this kind of thing. There's always some sort of small project, a small little pet thing that can serve as a test bed. I can tell you once you do that and people see auto-classification in action, they will quickly become kind of followers and supporters. So if you're looking to build support within your organization, that's probably the best way to do it.
Excellent. I don't know that I have a lot to add. I mean, maybe that budget question coming off the stakeholder slide. Budget can come from anywhere and for any reason. It's oftentimes so culturally dependent upon the organization and the leaders within it who own budgets. But it could be anything. I've always found it's always best to attach yourself to an existing budget. So as you're looking within your organization, talk to IT and see if they've got any initiatives around optimizing storage, or talk to records management and see if they have any sort of, funded initiative around cleaning up or old piles of stuff or whatnot. So, start there, start small, prove the wins, and like Sandy said, in my experience, when people see the technology in action, it's pretty shocking, and it's pretty easy to convert folks into being champions. So I'll mention real quick that coming up next in this webinar series of 4 parts is part 2, where we're going to dig into the details around creating structure from unstructured data. So it's more about the processing and tagging steps. That is scheduled for January 17th, 2018 at 1 p.m. Eastern. So we hope to see all of you there, and please invite friends who you think might benefit from these conversations. Again, real quick housekeeping, we are going to send out an email with the slides, a link to the recording, and a link for a feedback survey. So with that being said, next slide I think is just for Q&A. Sandy, you want to flip there? And we have 3 minutes if anybody has any questions. So let me take a look. I looked a few minutes ago.
One question
Go
I
ahead.
saw was, and you did say it, but I'll just reiterate it, was someone asking if they can get a copy of this webinar, and the answer is absolutely. We'll be putting it up on the website, sending it out to all of you. And next time round, I know there was a little bit of confusion with what are the coordinates to log in. That actually was a result of the overwhelming response that we had to this. So that's all been sorted out, so no further issues with logging in.
Yeah, great, thanks. So there's one great question on here, Sandy. I'm gonna kick it to you. It says the use cases discussed are based on documents. Can it also be applied to databases, tables, and records?
Okay. And the answer is yes. There's one small proviso, which is so long as that database or that structured data environment can be queried, which almost all of them are unless it's ancient. But usually they either have some sort of SQL layer or an LDAP layer. As long as that's queryable to an auto-classification engine, then yes, the same types of technologies can be used within structured data as well.
Excellent. There's one other question that I think we haven't touched on already, and I'm not sure I exactly understand what it means, but the question reads, is artificial intelligence included while classifying? And I think that might be a kind of a processing question of the smarts that you're adding while you're processing. You want to take a stab at that?
Sure. And AI is such a broad term, so with permission, I'm going to kind of sort of drill that down a little bit to machine learning. It did come up earlier, machine learning, that we would fit under the category of machine learning. One of the things when we get into rules particularly that happens is that a strong auto-classification engine should be able to learn from previously classified work, whether that was done by people or some other system, to be able to kind of look at the metadata that exists or look at a taxonomy that exists and essentially follow suit or drive decisioning from that which has already been done. So in that sense, there is an AI component, machine language component. We've stopped short of waving big AI banners around because there's just so much hype and kind of nonsense related to that. But there is an element of it here, yes.
Excellent. Well, we are actually out of time. If you had submitted a question, we didn't generally get to it, always feel free to reach out to us. We love this stuff. We're geeks about it, so we can talk all day about it. Feel free to give me a call or Sandy a call. Again, I want to thank everybody for your time and attention. We hope this has been useful to kind of give a broad overview of what this stuff is. I hope for those of you who had some good questions that you'll return for our future sessions and learn along with us. We'd love to learn what you're doing and the experiences you've had as well. So with that, I'm going to sign off and say thank you, Sandy, as well, for your participation with me, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Take care.